everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. I am your host, John, and today here on the channel, we're going to be counting down the top 10 celebrities who made a comeback. And this is actually a choice top 10 list for our channel bankroll member, Mr. Smelly Potato. If you are a channel bankroll member, every couple of months, we'll let you guys pick a video. And, a top 10 list is always a good place to go. And this is actually a great choice. The top 10 celebrities who made a comeback. I hadn't really thought about this, but there really have been many celebrities, many movie stars that we know today who kind of fell off the face of the earth, but then they just reappeared and had a second career, essentially. And today we're going to count them down from like the worst comeback to the biggest comeback of all time. And without further ado, let's just dive right into this list with number 10.
Ladies, I think it is time.
Time for what?
Time for enlightenment.
And at number 10, we got Hugh Grant. And Hugh Grant is really having a moment right now at Heretic that came out last year. He was even nominated for a Golden Globe for that performance. And that performance is great. Heretic really is a showpiece for Hugh Grant. It really is just his movie. As good as everybody else is in the movie, it's really a three-handed film, but he is phenomenal in it. He's carrying the movie. He's the one who gets the big monologues, and he doesn't look like Hugh Grant. The thing about Hugh Grant was in the 1990s when he first appeared on the scene, he was a heartthrob. Women loved this guy. Four Weddings and a Funeral was a big deal in 1994, and people just fell over heels in love with him. Loved him. He was a great interview, and then, of course, he got caught with a prostitute. That was headline news back in the 1990s. Like, everybody knew about that. He was the kind of guy, though, he faced the music, he faced the media, addressed it, and everyone seemed to like Hugh Grant. And he kind of carried this ladies' man personality all the way through, like, the early 2000s. Then you kind of stopped really hearing from Hugh Grant. And then The Gentleman came out right before the pandemic, and this guy wearing sunglasses, talking fast, just seems really jittery and kind of weird. That guy turns out to be Hugh Grant. You wouldn't expect it. Him and Charlie Hunnam have some great scenes together. Of all the people, Charlie Hunnam of Sons of Anarchy fame, who's also a pretty good actor that doesn't get the love he deserves, but he's no Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant gives a phenomenal performance in The Gentleman, and then everybody was like, Hugh Grant is back, and now he has this like second leg of his career where, he's not really leaning too much into his looks. He's really leaning into the fact that, I'm more than just a good-looking guy. I'm also a really good actor. So Hugh Grant gets number 10.
I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel, for help.
Next up, at number 9, Marlon Brando, one of the greatest actors of all time, especially in the 1940s and 1950s. I mean, he gets brought up a lot on the show I Love Lucy because if you were to go back in the pop culture in the 1950s, who was a bigger actor than Marlon Brando? He changed acting forever with A Streetcar Named Desire, and then, of course, on the Waterfront is one of the greatest Best Picture winners of all time in the 1950s. I could have been a contender. Like, it was a huge deal. And if you didn't grow up at the time in, like, the 1940s and 1950s, you might not realize that Marlon Brando was this famous of a guy. You probably only know him from The Godfather. That's the first place I ever saw Marlon Brando, like a lot of people around my age. You saw him in The Godfather. You heard about that performance before you even see the film. You knew who The Godfather was. You knew that was Marlon Brando. But you don't realize this guy was this big-time actor before that who even had a hard time getting a job on The Godfather. He actually had to do a screen test. The studio did not want him. He was like persona non grata at this time. Really hard to work with. And people just didn't want him in the movie. They told Francis Ford Coppola get anyone else, and he had to convince them. He literally went to his house. They put shoe polish in his hair. He did the screen test, and that got him the job. He was still tough to work with, but throughout the rest of his career, people actually were able to find a way to work with the guy. And, of course, we got this great performance that led to eventually Superman, and you had the second act of Marlon Brando's career. But he was gone for quite some time throughout the 1960s, so I'm sure people who loved him in the 1940s and 50s were glad to see him pop back up. And the next one is Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is a very special one for me throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and then, of course, the early 2000s. Keanu Reeves could be argued as the most popular actor at that time. He was in Bill and Ted in the 80s, then in the 1990s, he's in Point Break, really reshaping his career, becoming an action star with movies like Speed in 1994. And then, of course, he hit superstardom and became probably the biggest actor on the planet in 1999 when he played Neo in The Matrix. But that also, I think, kind of started the beginning beginning of the end of him being at like the climax of his career, of being at the top of the movie world, because then the Matrix sequels kind of fall off throughout the 2000s. He's in stuff, but he's not as popular. Like Constantine might be a big deal now looking back on it, but in 2005, Constantine kind of just came and went, and people didn't really recognize that was Keanu in that movie. They really just kind of thought about the character. So Keanu Reeves was kind of gone until about, I think, 2014. Then the movie John Wick was coming out. John Wick was going to go directly to video. This movie that people love nowadays that has 4 films in it and is even getting a spin-off was going to go direct to video because movies like 47 Robin just came and went. He was just in these movies that didn't do good at the box office. Nobody cared about Keanu Reeves. But then John Wick did get released in theaters, and word of mouth just made that film take off to the point that people demanded a sequel, and that was it. Keanu got his second act. He was growing that beard out. They knew exactly what to do with Keanu Reeves. Don't give him too much dialogue. Just make him an action star. He's always willing to do the work. He's always willing to actually learn the choreography and learn this gun fu for these movies. And then, of course, that leads to other acting roles and even little cameos that are really funny because Keanu really did get right back into the pop culture limelight. And you love to see that because Keanu Reeves, he's just one of those actors and one of those people that people absolutely love. He's a nice guy. If we ever found out that Keanu Reeves turns out to be a piece of garbage, I think we'll all be pretty disappointed. And I'll probably lose all hope in humanity because he's supposed to be one of the good ones. And next up at number 7, Eddie Murphy. And I can see people arguing like Eddie Murphy didn't really go anywhere. But think about it. Eddie Murphy in the 1980s, the way he took off with Saturday Night Live, that led to this big iconic film career starting with 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop, Trading Places, Coming to America in the 1980s. He even has a hit song in the 1980s with My Girl Wants to Party All the Time, Party All the Time. Then he kind of has a little bit of a low point, but it's only a few years, and that leads to The Nutty Professor, which is a big hit in the 1990s. Even got a sequel, Dr. Doodle at the end of the 1990s. But then the 2000s come along, and he's in some stuff. He's in like Daddy Daycare, The Haunted Mansion, but he's not really in the limelight. And then he really fades away. He's not really even acting that much anymore. He makes an appearance on Saturday Night Live, doesn't even say a word. He just kind of like goes out there. That's it. He's not going to do a skit or anything like that, even though he is one of the most iconic actors in Saturday Night Live's history. I believe that was like the 40th anniversary. Then we get word he's going to be in this movie, Dolomite Is My Name. And that movie turns out to be a pretty big hit for Netflix. That director is going to direct Coming to America, or Coming to America 2, whatever you want to call it. And it's also kind of a career resurgence for Wesley Snipes' Dolomite Is My Name as well. But Eddie Murphy is one of these big-time actors. Everyone loves Eddie Murphy. And people were just hoping to see him get back into the groove of being Eddie Murphy and being that funny guy. And he was funny in Dolomite Is My Name. He was funny in Coming to America, even though the sequel's not as good. And then, of course, we get to see him again back on Saturday Night Live, where he belongs. And you feel like Eddie Murphy really is truly back after being gone for all of those years. So I have to put Eddie Murphy at number 7 just because I truly love this man's work.
Shake, shake, Sinora, shake your body liner. Shake, shake, shake,
And at number 6, I got Winona Ryder, another actress who just blew up in the 1980s with movies like Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, which actually is 1990. And then, of course, Heathers, which is another one of my big-time favorite movies from the 1980s. That movie's just got so much charm, and it's got so much style. I love that movie, Heathers, and she was great in that. And then, of course, her career is very successful in the early 1990s, and then you really stop hearing about her until she becomes like a kleptomaniac, and she gets arrested for stealing, even though, obviously, she's got all this money. She's Winona Ryder. What do you need to steal for? But turns out she just, likes to steal things. And then you kind of stop hearing from Winona Ryder again. You don't really even think too much about her. You see her in Beetlejuice, like on VHS or DVD, and you think, oh, that's cool. Winona Ryder was great back in the day, wasn't she? And then a show named Stranger Things comes along, and we're bringing back a lot of actors who were, very popular in the 80s. Who was more popular than Winona Ryder? Not too many actresses in the 1980s. People love Beetlejuice, which is kind of floating that, gothic horror line, and bring her back into this show that's paying homage to Stephen King, John Carpenter, and Steven Spielberg. It's a match made in heaven. She'll play the mother of the boy who gets kidnapped. And what do you know? The show turns out to be an absolute mega hit. We're getting the 5th and final season this year, where all the actors are now about 35 years old playing high schoolers. Makes no sense, but we're all there to see the finale of Stranger Things because this thing was huge. I think Stranger Things did a lot to popularize Netflix. It wasn't the early days, but, it was still kind of on the rise. Now you would say that they've, climaxed and, they're kind of on the decline because of everything going on with streaming services and how they basically want a mortgage payment for you to subscribe to them. But Winona Ryder, she's great. She's kind of back in the limelight again. We just had Beetlejuice last year, which everyone was happy to see. Lydia Dietz pop back up again. She was great. Wasn't necessarily the best of the performances in that movie, but still always fun to see Winona Ryder, and it was glad to see her get that career resurgence.
That's great. Can we get going? I'm bored as shit back here.
Go.
Let's go. It's a freaking boring spot.
Number 5, Neil Patrick Harris. And Neil Patrick Harris might not be one of those people you think about too much, but in the early 1990s, he was Doogie Howser. This child prodigy of becoming a doctor. He was a genius, a kid doctor. The show was actually very popular. I only seen a few episodes of it. Kind of came out at a time where, I wasn't necessarily watching TV. I was a baby at the time. And then, of course, in the mid-2000s, me being me, a movie coming along named Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle was coming out. The movie poster caught my eye. I'm like, how'd they get the White Castle logo actually on the poster? I was like, I didn't know about the guy starred in the movie. I just knew I had to see a movie about White Castle. And of course, it's a couple of stoners. Having a blast, going to White Castle one night. We've all been there. And the movie really struck me. I thought it was comedic gold. And who pops up in the middle of the movie but Neil fucking Patrick Harris, who these guys absolutely love. They can't believe it. He's playing himself, an over-exaggerated version of himself, a womanizer, a drug user, just terrible to humanity. And this leads him to get, I think in the same exact year, How I Met Your Mother. And he plays a very similar character. He plays Barney Stinson, very similar to the character of Neil Patrick Harris in the Harold and Kumar series. Obviously a little bit turned down, not really doing drugs, but still a womanizer. And I love How I Met Your Mother. I think that was one of the best sitcoms ever made. Has a pretty bad couple of last seasons, and I think the finale's not that good. But overall, the first few seasons are iconic, and people know Neil Patrick Harris now. He's hosted a bunch of award shows. He gets miscast in Gone Girl. He is great, Neil Patrick Harris. Also another one of those celebrities who seems like they're very down to earth, just a genuinely nice guy, and those are the kinds of people that I root for. So I was always happy to see him get this career resurgence. That's been going on for now about 20 years, but he was gone for 12.
Hey, you cheat, Dr. Jones, you cheat. Use the full card.
Kiwi Kwan. Kiwi Kwan was gone. This is one of the big childhood actors of the 1980s, at least in film. He had 2 iconic roles in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and then, of course, The Goonies. He was just so popular, and he always seemed like a really cool, nice kid, and then he disappeared. He didn't really necessarily disappear. He was kind of just working behind the scenes, working on fight choreography, and that's kind of led him to his big career resurgence a few years ago in the Best Picture winner, Everything Everywhere All at Once. People saw him in that, saw that he's still this charming, nice guy. You recognize that voice immediately, and people were rooting for Kiwi Kwan to the point that he's getting leading roles in films now in 2025. He's popped up in other stuff, and of course, another one of those great celebrities who just seems like genuinely the nicest guy. I remember, I started getting a little bit emotional when I saw the picture of Harrison Ford and Kiwi Kwan hugging at I think it was the Academy Awards that year. They had reunited, and that was great, because, Harrison Ford, he could be a little bit of a curmudgeon, a little bit of a, he's an older guy now. You know how Harrison Ford is. And he embraced him and everything, and that picture just warmed my heart to see Short Round and Indiana Jones get back together after all these years. Just love those moments, and I love that Kiwi Kwan is having his career resurgence, because we always root for the nice guys.
We are in serious trouble.
And the Oscar goes to Brendan Fraser.
Speaking of the nice guys, at number 3, I got Brendan Fraser. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Brendan Fraser was not just a heartthrob, but he was also a leading man in the Mummy franchise. He was in Encino Man in the early 1990s. He was in a lot of successful movies throughout the 1990s. You always knew his face. He also has a great cameo appearance in 2 episodes of the show Scrubs, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. I rewatch that show every single year. It's one of those special shows to me. I remember the days when I could actually TiVo, if you guys remember TiVo, I would TiVo the reruns of Scrubs. I just absolutely love that show. And he has this character, a very sad character. I won't spoil it if you've never seen Scrubs. Just check out Scrubs. But that's how big Brendan Fraser was, that his cameo appearances on Scrubs were a big deal because, I mean, again, the Mummy franchise was huge. That's why they wanted to reboot it with Tom Cruise, and it didn't work out. But Brendan Fraser, after I think it was Looney Tunes Back in Action, if I'm correct, he disappeared, and we found out that all the stuff that happened behind the scenes with him, and you don't blame him for wanting to leave Hollywood after everything that had happened. So of course he leaves Hollywood for a while. He comes back and he makes a little movie called The Whale, and that movie wins him an Academy Award. And then of course he's been popping up in other movies as well. You love to see it because people might not realize, Brendan Fraser, again, just a really nice guy. Love to hear him in interviews, but he's also a phenomenal actor. And I think that's one thing that kind of got lost in his first run, was that he is a great actor. Yeah, he's in these blockbuster franchise films and he's in Encino Man, but still, he is a great actor when he wants to be. And of course, then you get this great performance for him to sink his teeth into. And Darren Aronofsky's, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that right wrong. That's just a real tongue twister for me. But he got that performance in The Whale. Don't really necessarily love The Whale, but I love the performance. And that's why a performance like that does deserve an Academy Award. And I'm just really glad to see Brendan Fraser back. And I went back and forth with my number 2 and number 1, but I got to give number 2 to John Travolta because his big comeback in 1994's Pulp Fiction was a huge deal. It still gets brought up to this very day because, at this point in 1994, John Travolta, he was just really doing the Look Who's Talking movies. Now, did I love the Look Who's Talking movies? Yes, but I was a child then, so of course, I loved Look Who's Talking 1, 2, and I even loved Look Who's Talking 3 with the Talking Dogs. Didn't matter. Love those movies. So John Travolta has kind of been ingrained in my mind since literally the first memories I could ever have of watching the movies like Look Who's Talking. So him and Kirstie Alley, when Kirstie Alley passed away, it meant a lot to me just because I love the Look Who's Talking movies. Now, if you grew up in the 1960s and 1970s and the guy from Saturday Night Fever and Grease comes along and now, this great time, this big time actor in Blowout like John Travolta, I mean, superstar. My aunt, my mom loved John Travolta, and they said in the 1980s he kind of just wasn't there. He just wasn't doing the big time movies. I'm not too sure what happened. Made a lot of bad decisions on films, I guess, and that's what led him to the Look Who's Talking movies, to the point that nobody would even give him a job. And when Quentin Tarantino sat down with him to do From Dusk Till Dawn, because he wasn't going to have, he was originally going to have Michael Madsen play the Vincent Vega role, but, John Travolta's like, I really like this role, and finally he was able to persuade Quentin Tarantino, because Tarantino, being the fanboy that he is, he's sitting there with John Travolta. He's like, you should give me this role. And then From Dusk Till Dawn ended up going to George Clooney, which does work out as well. But of course, Vincent Vega is one of the most iconic characters in film history. It is John Travolta's best role, and that role led to so many other iconic roles like Broken Arrow, Face Off, working with John Woo, Get Shorty. We wouldn't have gotten all these movies in the 1990s, that career resurgence, Swordfish, if it wasn't for Pulp Fiction. So his career was pretty much in the dumpster. Then Pulp Fiction came along, and he got that big-time career resurgence. Now, you could say John Travolta's at a real career low right now, again, because we haven't seen him really pop up in too much of good quality in years, but it's still John Travolta, and at this point, he's so late in his career, you could forgive a lot of the stuff he pops up in. And of course, he also was in Taking Pelham 1, 2, 3 remake from Tony Scott, so he was still popping around doing a good job. He's John Travolta, so that's got to be number 2.
From Academy Award-winning director Richard Attenborough, Robert Downey Jr.
I am Iron Man.
And the Oscar goes to Robert Downey Jr.
And then what about number 1? Well, what about Iron Man? Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr., people probably only think of him as Iron Man, and being in the MCU nowadays might not even realize that this guy has been around since the 1980s. He was even on the 11th season of Saturday Night Live. He was nominated for Chaplin. He literally was in the limelight. He's the son of Robert Downey. This guy was all over the place. He was a world-renowned actor. I saw him in U.S. Marshals, I think, in 1997. And I loved him. I always thought he was a great actor, but then of course you hear about all the behind the scenes stuff with him. He has a really bad drug problem. A drug problem that was constantly getting him arrested. He even went to prison, I believe, for 1 full year. There's that crazy thing you probably heard him say that, like, you know, it's like having a shotgun in my mouth, but I like the taste of metal. That's how much this guy loved drugs. No one probably thought he would ever make a career comeback. He struggled all the way up until the time he was on Ally McBeal, and they fired him. And then even once it came back around from movies like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and he cleaned himself up when movies, and he was ready for movies like Iron Man, nobody would insure him. Like, it was really a big gamble to have Robert Downey Jr. play Iron Man, despite the fact he had already cleaned up his act. But the gamble paid off, and now Robert Downey Jr. is one of the highest paid actors in history. There's a reason why Marvel went crawling back to get him back into the MCU, because he sells, and he's got that great personality. And then, of course, it all culminated last year with a Best Supporting Actor win for Oppenheimer, because at the end of the day, he might pop up in one of the biggest franchises in the history of franchises, but he is still one of our great actors, and you love to see him get recognized for it. He had one of my favorite moments at the most recent Academy Awards, just because, you know, he comes out there and just the way he speaks, he just knows how to deliver dialogue or deliver speeches like he did at the Academy Awards. He just has that charm to, like, just drag you in. He's magnetic, and that's why people were really happy to see him come back to the limelight, and still have him back to this very day, 17 years after Iron Man. It's really, truly the greatest comeback story in the history of Hollywood. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it here for me on another episode of Let's Talk. I hope you guys enjoyed this top 10 video, and if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video if you could. We also have channel membership, so if you want to become a friend of the channel, a producer for the channel like John Don Juggalo, a director for the channel like Uncle V and Kevin Kruger, or even a channel bankroll member like Mr. Smelly Potato and Frank from Frank's Media Reviews. You guys can look for all of those perks in the description below. But if you got no money to throw away, guys, don't you worry about it all. We just hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, get out in those streets, tell your friends about us, and then we'll be seeing you around.